Look closely at this stone. It weighs over 1,000 tons. If we tried to lift it today, our most advanced industrial cranes would buckle and snap under the stress. Yet thousands of years ago, someone not only moved it, they lifted it 20 feet into the air and locked it into place with microscopic precision. Mainstream academics claim this was done with nothing but copper chisels, ropes, and primitive brute force. But the raw physics tell a completely different, almost terrifying story. Today, we are unlocking 5 ancient megalithic structures that completely break the laws of modern engineering and utterly destroy the timeline of human history. Hidden in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon lies an archaeological site that mainstream historians love to claim as a Roman triumph. And they aren't entirely wrong. The Romans did build the magnificent Temple of Jupiter here. But if you look closely at the foundation, beneath the classical Roman columns, you will find something that has no business existing in the ancient world. Welcome to the Trilithon of Baalbek. This isn't just a wall. It is a trio of the largest building blocks ever manipulated by human hands. Each of these 3 stones is approximately 64 feet long, 14 feet high, and 12 feet thick. But the dimensions aren't what breaks the minds of modern engineers. It is the weight. Each stone weighs an estimated 800 to 1,000 tons. To put that into perspective, that is the weight of 3 fully loaded Boeing 747 airplanes per stone. Mainstream science asks you to believe a very comfortable story. They tell us that Roman architects, using tens of thousands of slaves, wooden rollers, ropes and pulleys, dragged these blocks from a quarry and hoisted them into place. But let's talk about the raw physics. To drag a 1,000-ton block of solid rock across uneven earth, the amount of physical human force required is staggering. Estimates suggest it would take upwards of 40,000 men pulling simultaneously. But here is the critical engineering flaw in that theory. There simply isn't enough physical space around the stones to fit 40,000 men, let alone coordinate them. Furthermore, these stones aren't just sitting on the ground. They were lifted over 20 feet into the air and placed on top of a base layer of smaller stones with such devastating precision that you cannot slide a razor blade between the joints. A slip of even an inch would have crushed the foundation and destroyed the wall. If the Trilithon isn't impossible enough, the real nightmare for academics is sitting less than a mile away in the ancient quarry. Left abandoned, jutting out of the earth like a forgotten weapon, is the stone of the pregnant woman. This single, unbroken megalith is even larger than the ones used in the temple wall, weighing a mind-numbing 1,200 tons, and right next to it, buried under the dirt and only recently uncovered, are 2 more blocks weighing upwards of 1,650 tons. Why were they left behind? History tells us the Romans abandoned the project because the stones were too heavy to move. But if the builders of Baalbek couldn't move a 1,100-ton stone, how did they move the 3 1,000-ton stones already sitting 20 feet up in the temple wall? Look at the weathering on the Trilithon compared to the Roman ruins built directly on top of them. The Roman stones are heavily pitted by thousands of years of wind and rain, but the massive megaliths beneath them show signs of extreme, deep water erosion and a level of decay that suggests they have been sitting there for much, much longer. This leads to a terrifying conclusion that rewrites our history. The Romans didn't build the foundation of Baalbek. They simply found it. They built their temple on top of a megalithic platform left behind by a civilization that predates them by thousands of years. A lost civilization that possessed a profound understanding of leverage, acoustics, or anti-gravity engineering that has been completely erased from the human record. Science cannot explain how the Trilithon was moved. They can only guess. And until we find the real answer, Baalbek stands as a 3,000-ton middle finger to everything we thought we knew about human history. When we look at Stonehenge, we think we know the story. It is the quintessential ancient monument. Mainstream textbooks paint a quaint picture of primitive Britons dragging rocks across the Salisbury Plain to worship the sun. It sounds plausible, right up until you look at the geological map. The most crucial stones at Stonehenge, the inner horseshoe of massive pillars known as the bluestones, do not belong here. They were not quarried from the local landscape. Geological matching has proven, without a shadow of a doubt, that these 4-ton stones came from the Preseli Hills in Wales. That is over 140 miles away. Imagine the sheer insanity of this task. You are a society that has not yet invented the wheel. You do not have steel, pulleys, or beasts of burden capable of this haul. Yet, you decide to transport up to 80 massive stones, weighing up to 4 tons each, across 140 miles of unforgiving terrain. Academics argue they floated them on wooden rafts down the Welsh coast and up the rivers, but modern attempts to recreate this simple water route with identical stones and wooden rafts have repeatedly ended in disaster, with the multi-ton rocks plunging to the bottom of the Bristol Channel. If modern teams with precise historical knowledge and safety boats cannot replicate the journey, how did hunter-gatherers do it flawlessly 80 times? And more importantly, why? Why bypass thousands of perfectly good, massive stones closer to the site, just to drag these specific bluestones across a continent? The answer defies traditional archaeology. It brings us into the realm of ancient, applied physics. When you strike the bluestones of Stonehenge, they don't produce a dull thud. They ring. They are what geologists call lithophones, rocks that possess an acoustic property causing them to resonate with metallic, bell-like tones when struck. In the ancient world, sound was power. Acoustic engineers who have mapped the soundscape of Stonehenge discovered that the circular placement of these specific, ringing stones creates an active interference pattern. They didn't just build a monument, they built a massive, open-air acoustic amplifier. A machine designed to manipulate sound frequencies, creating a sensory experience that science is only just beginning to map. But manipulating sound was just the beginning. Stonehenge is perfectly aligned with the summer and winter solstices, but its precision goes terrifyingly deeper. The ring of 56 pits surrounding the stones, known as the Aubrey Holes, functions as an exact astronomical calculator. By moving markers from hole to hole, the builders could accurately predict lunar eclipses. Let that sink in. A society that mainstream history dismisses as primitive brutes built a 5,000-year-old analog computer out of 4-ton stones, capable of tracking the complex, multi-year cycles of the cosmos. They possessed a mathematical and astronomical genius that rivals our modern observatories. Science cannot explain where they got this knowledge, or how they mapped the heavens with such devastating perfection. The builders of Stonehenge didn't just understand the Earth, they were tracking the universe. For centuries, mainstream history painted a very specific, very limited picture of sub-Saharan Africa. The academic consensus was that no advanced, monumental stone-building civilizations existed there in antiquity. Then, European explorers stumbled upon the Great Enclosure. Hidden in the heart of modern-day Zimbabwe is a sprawling, abandoned megalithic metropolis. When early 19th century archaeologists first laid eyes on its towering, 30-foot-high walls, their ingrained prejudices completely short-circuited. They simply refused to believe that the indigenous African population could have engineered it. They desperately credited it to wandering Phoenicians, lost Romans, or even the biblical Queen of Sheba. But the truth is far, far more complex, and the engineering behind it is something modern science still struggles to fully replicate. Welcome to Great Zimbabwe. At first glance, you might think you are looking at a medieval castle. But look closer at the walls. There is no mortar. Not a single drop of cement, clay, or binding agent was used in the construction of this massive city. Instead, the builders relied on a terrifyingly precise mastery of gravity, friction, and geometry. They meticulously cut and stacked millions of individual granite blocks. To build a curving wall 30 feet high and 15 feet thick without mortar requires an absolute, flawless understanding of weight distribution and structural integrity. A single miscalculation at the base would cause the entire multi-ton structure to violently collapse under its own weight. Yet, these walls have stood for over 900 years. The scale of this architectural anomaly is staggering. It is estimated that over 900,000 to 1 million stone blocks were used just for the great enclosure alone. Mainstream science tells us they extracted these stones by lighting massive fires on the granite bedrock and rapidly throwing cold water on it to fracture the stone. But to yield millions of nearly identical, uniform blocks using this primitive thermal shock method? The logistics of the fuel, the water transport, and the sheer labor force required border on the impossible. And they didn't just build walls, they built an acoustic labyrinth. The curved corridors inside the enclosure are designed in such a way that a normal speaking voice can be heard clearly over 100 yards away, bouncing perfectly along the mortarless granite. Great Zimbabwe is a geographical anomaly that shatters the isolated, primitive narrative of ancient Africa. Artifacts dug out of the dirt here, Ming dynasty pottery from China, Persian glass, and Arabian coins, prove that whoever built these gravity-defying walls was at the center of a massive, global trade network long before the modern era. They were an empire of immense wealth and profound architectural genius. And then, they vanished. The site was completely abandoned, leaving behind no written records, only millions of perfectly stacked stones. Great Zimbabwe stands as a silent, monolithic reminder that history is not a straight line from primitive to advanced. It is a cycle of brilliant, timeless empires that rise, build the impossible, and disappear into the hidden places of the earth. So far, we have looked at structures whose impossibility lies in their crushing weight. But sometimes, the greatest threats to the accepted historical timeline aren't massive at all. Sometimes, they are hiding right in plain sight. In the middle of the Kup complex in Delhi, India, stands a 23-foot tall piece of iron. Compared to the 1,000-ton stones of Baalbek, it looks almost entirely unremarkable. But to modern metallurgists, chemists, and engineers, this single piece of metal is one of the most frustrating, impossible artifacts on the face of the earth. This pillar was forged over 1,600 years ago. Let that sink in. For 16 centuries, this pillar has been completely exposed to the brutal, blistering heat of the Indian summer. It has been battered by thousands of torrential monsoon rains and suffocating humidity. By every known law of modern chemistry, this 6-ton piece of wrought iron should have corroded away into a pile of red dust 1,000 years ago. Modern steel, the stuff we use to build skyscrapers and battleships, requires constant painting, chemical treatments, and maintenance just to survive a few decades in the elements. Yet, the iron pillar of Delhi stands completely, flawlessly free of rust. It is immortal. Mainstream science was so baffled by this that they eventually took microscopic samples to figure out how ancient blacksmiths broke the laws of corrosion. What they found only deepened the mystery. The ancient builders used a highly specific, high-phosphorus iron extraction technique that is completely absent from modern metallurgy. When this specific mixture of iron and high phosphorus reacted with the local climate, it created a microscopic, self-healing shield called misawite. Academics quickly labelled this a lucky accident. They want you to believe that 4th century blacksmiths, working with mud furnaces and hand bellows, accidentally stumbled upon a perfect, anti-corrosive chemical balance that modern science couldn't even identify until the 20th century. But what if it wasn't an accident at all? Creating iron with this exact purity and this specific phosphorus content requires a terrifying level of heat control and a profound understanding of chemical engineering. You do not accidentally forge a 6-ton, rust-proof monolith. The iron pillar of Delhi strongly suggests that the ancient world possessed a level of advanced industrial technology that has been deliberately ignored or tragically lost to time. If they could manipulate chemistry to build immortal metals 1,900 years ago, what else were they capable of? Science can finally explain what the metal is. But they are completely powerless to explain how primitive minds engineered it. Every structure we have looked at so far challenges what we know about engineering. But our final hidden place doesn't just challenge history, it completely destroys it. If you ask a mainstream academic when human civilization began, they will tell you it started around 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, right after we learned how to farm. But buried under a massive, artificial hill in southeastern Turkey lies a megalithic complex that was built a staggering 11,600 years ago. This is Göbekli Tepe. It is 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. It is 6,000 years older than the first pyramid of Giza. According to traditional science, the people who built this shouldn't have even known how to build a stone wall. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were supposed to be primitive hunter-gatherers. They didn't have metal tools, they didn't have the wheel, and they hadn't even invented pottery. Yet, they managed to quarry, carve, and transport massive limestone pillars, some weighing up to 16 tons and standing 18 feet tall. They arranged them in perfect, geometrically aligned circles. The sheer logistics of feeding and organizing the hundreds of workers required for this project is entirely impossible for a nomadic tribe. This single site forced archaeologists to admit a terrifying truth. We had the story backwards. Agriculture didn't give birth to religion and temples. The desperate need to build this impossible monument is what forced primitive man to invent agriculture just to feed the builders. But they didn't just stand these 16-ton stones upright. They carved them with a terrifying 3D precision that looks like it was done with modern rotary tools. The pillars are covered in high-relief sculptures of deadly predators, lions, scorpions, spiders, and vultures. But these aren't just primitive art projects. When archaeoastronomers mapped the carvings on Pillar 43, known as the Vulture Stone, they realized it wasn't just a picture of animals. It was a perfect, astronomical map of the night sky from exactly 10,950 BC. Many independent researchers believe this pillar is a permanent warning carved in stone, documenting a catastrophic comet impact that triggered a global ice age and wiped out an advanced civilization. They built an indestructible monument to tell us that the world ended once before. But the greatest mystery of Göbekli Tepe isn't how it was built, it is how it died. After using this massive complex for 1,000 years, the builders didn't just abandon it to the elements. They did something entirely inexplicable. They spent decades painstakingly hauling thousands of tons of dirt, gravel, and refused to completely bury the site. They entombed their masterpiece under a massive artificial mountain. Why? Were they hiding it from an invading force? Were they preserving it for a future generation? Or were they trying to lock something away? Mainstream science has no answers. Göbekli Tepe, along with Baalbek, Stonehenge, Great Zimbabwe, and the Iron Pillar, stand as undeniable proof that the story of human history is broken. We are not the first advanced minds to walk this earth, and we may just be the survivors of timeless empires that science simply cannot explain. If you want to uncover more hidden places and impossible mysteries that rewrite history, hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment below telling me which of these 5 structures you think is the most impossible, and I'll see you in the next video.